Amtrak's City of New Orleans train runs between Chicago and New Orleans. It takes just under 20 hours and stops at 18 stations on its 934-mile route. Some of those stops are at big cities, but most aren't. So where exactly does the City of New Orleans go? And what's notable about each place? In this video, we'll take a look at the history and the current situation at every stop along the way. First, some quick facts about the City of New Orleans train itself. It began as an overnight service called the Chicago and New Orleans Limited in the early 1900s, part of the Illinois Central Railroad. And remember that railroad, because the Illinois Central will pop up over and over again in this video. In 1911, the service changed its name to the Panama Limited, in honor of the then new Panama Canal.
I wouldn't let that Panama Limited pass. I got those ever-loving blues for loving Sam, my railroad man.
Trains took 25 hours in those days, and some cars branched off to go to Hot Springs, Arkansas, or San Antonio, Texas. By the 1930s, the railroad had managed to reduce the time to 20 hours, and by the 1940s to 16 and a half. Now that it was possible, they added the City of New Orleans service, the longest daytime-only train in the United States. Amtrak started in 1971 and took over the routes. It dropped the Panama Limited and kept the City of New Orleans, but a few months later rethought all that, renamed the City of New Orleans Panama Limited, and made it overnight, a roundabout way of dropping the City of New Orleans in favor of the Panama Limited. And throughout the 70s, that's what it was. In 1972, Arlo Guthrie had a hit with a song called City of New Orleans, written by Steve Goodman, a country and folk performer and writer from Chicago, who'd originally recorded it in 1971. The song describes a ride on the Illinois Central Railroad's City of New Orleans and wistfully reflects on the waning popularity of trains in America. Because Arlo Guthrie's version was such a big hit, in 1981, Amtrak renamed the Panama Limited City of New Orleans, which of course is still what it is today. Chicago Union Station is arguably the most important train station in America, and in this video we'll be leaving here on the way south to New Orleans. I've covered Chicago Union Station extensively in other videos, so for now let's just hit the rails. The City of New Orleans, as of this video, leaves once every day at 8:05 p.m. when it's already dark. In fact, both southbound and northbound passengers will miss virtually all of Illinois. It's less than an hour to the first stop, Homewood. Homewood is a village in the larger Thornton Township, which includes another village also called Thornton. The original rail stop here in 1853 was called Thornton, and it was on a Chicago to Kankakee train. Thornton contains one of the world's largest quarries, but despite that claim to fame, in 1869 it was decided to name the depot Homewood instead. In the ensuing decades, rich Chicagoans started riding the train here to go golfing at Ravislow Country Club and build houses here, pulling attention away from Thornton. When a new train depot was built in 1923, it was designed in the Mission Revival style to match the country club. 23,000 people on average use Amtrak trains at this station, but that includes not only the City of New Orleans, but also the Illini and the Saluki, a pair of trains that go as far as Carbondale, but actually stop at more stations than the City of New Orleans does. Famous people related to Homewood include Milton Reynolds, who perfected the ballpoint pen, invested early in the development of birth control pills, and was a member of the country club, and Jermaine Stewart, whom you may remember had a hit in the 1980s with We Don't Have to Take Our Clothes Off to Have a Good Time, and who died of liver cancer in Homewood in 1997. I mention that because, as we'll see, music, in one form or another, seems to permeate this line all the way down. Northbound passengers should be in Homewood around 8 in the morning, so you will see it in the daylight. Chicago Metra trains also stop here, and if you're here in the daytime, there's a railroad museum nearby. The train's next stop is Kankakee, notable for actually being mentioned in the song. This is a flag stop, not a regular one, meaning that City of New Orleans trains only stop at Kankakee if someone is scheduled to get on or off. Otherwise, the train just passes through. Illini and Saluki trains always stop here. Train service to Kankakee began in 1853, and the current station was built in 1897. It was restored in the 1990s and is on the National Register of Historic Places. Kankakee is 56 miles from Chicago, and it's said that when the train came, it reduced travel to Chicago from 6 days to 3 hours. You can get a sense of how utterly trains transformed America in the 1800s. There are about 24,000 people in Kankakee, and famous people from here include the actor Fred McMurray of My Three Sons fame, and Jill DeVries, a Playboy playmate in 1975. More famously, or infamously, is the fact that in 1999, in a book called Places Rated Almanac, Kankakee was rated the worst city in the U.S. and Canada combined. Taking pity and seeing an opportunity for some comedy, To help spruce the town up, David Letterman called Kankakee's mayor on his show to unveil a gift, a gazebo, which absurdly was followed a few shows later with a second gazebo. The two gazebos stood in Kankakee for years until 2015, when local students, who were surprised to learn that their beloved hometown had ever been thought of as a worst place, made a rocking chair out of wood from one of the gazebos and sent it back to Dave. The other Letterman gazebo is still in the park in Kankakee, for now. Two houses in Kankakee were designed by the legendary Frank Lloyd Wright, the Warren Hickox house from 1900 and the B. Harley Bradley house from 1901, next door. They're in the prairie school style, meaning lots of horizontal lines and rows of windows and sloped roofs. The style is said to mimic the flat horizontal lines of the prairies themselves. And that's appropriate. As the song says, the train pulls out of Kankakee and rolls along past houses, farms, and fields. And while it's dark for southbound riders, northbound riders, if they're awake, will start to see that that's an accurate description of the landscape between here and the next stop. Which is a big one, the twin cities of Champaign and Urbana. About 217,000 people use Amtrak trains here every year, and rail history goes back to the 1800s. In fact, the depot, built in 1899, is still in town, and as of now houses a barbecue restaurant. A 1913 building for the Illinois Traction System, a series of tram-like trains in the area, also still sits, next door to the current station. A 1925 train station building was used for decades by the Illinois Central and then by Amtrak, until 1999, when the current station was built. Champaign Station, or as it's actually called, Illinois Terminal, is the second busiest station in Illinois after Chicago. You can explore the area thanks to a bus network that also uses the station. Champaign is notable for many things. For one thing, it's the hub of one of America's so-called Silicon Prairies, technological centers in the Midwest. Native sons include political commentator George Will and the band REO Speedwagon. Near the station is a building called Cattle Bank, Champaign's oldest building. It was just that, a bank for cattle ranchers who came to town to ship cattle north by train. Incidentally, a young Abraham Lincoln once cashed a check at the bank. In 1985, the first Farm Aid concert was held in Champaign, and it was at the local University of Illinois campus that two of YouTube's founders met, famously leading years later to this very video. That university is the largest employer in town by far. South of Champaign is a river that is called, it's not called the Embarrass River. It's pronounced Embra, unfortunately. Depending on the time of year and the train's punctuality, the next station, Matune, might be the first thing that early risers on the northbound city of New Orleans see. For southbound passengers, it's just getting close to midnight. Matune has had quite an illustrious history. It just happened to become a rail crossroads in the 1850s, leading to the area booming and becoming a town in 1857. That same year, town leaders established some rules that Wikipedia characterizes as forbidding drunkenness, working on Saturday, disturbing public or religious meetings, gaming, leaving carcasses on the street, littering, obstructing sidewalks, and driving fast horses. Kind of a nice little jumble of boring misdemeanors and depraved serial killer madness. Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas both stayed overnight in Matune before their fourth debate. In those days, the place was actually called Pegtown, only changing to its new name in honor of railroad engineer William Matune. Matune made national news in 1917 when it was demolished by a strong tornado. And again, for a much stranger reason, in 1944. For 2 weeks, the town was apparently terrorized by the Mad Gasser. That is, someone going around and causing sickness by sneaking into people's houses and pumping some foul chemicals into the air. It lasted 2 weeks, and from then until now, it's not known what it was, who did it, or indeed if anything was done at all. Police downplayed it as mass hysteria, although it's generally thought now that at least some of the claims of foul odors and sickness were true. Anyway, nobody died or suffered any lasting effects. No carcasses left in the street, per the town's rules. Just one of those weird things in history. And speaking of health problems, the first ever Burger King is in Matune. Sort of. A restaurant with that name opened in 1957, and then the owners found out about a new Florida-based chain called Burger King, the one we all know. Lawsuits arose, and the courts decided that the bigger Burger King could not open a location in Matune, and that the smaller Burger King could not open a location outside of Matune. And that's still how it is. And speaking of food, a factory once opened in Matune for a food company who needed a name and wanted something innocent and childlike. So they combined the words bingo and Bambi, giving themselves the name Bimbo. Great job, guys. And speaking of serial killers, Daniel Siebert, a serial killer from the 1980s in the Las Vegas and Los Angeles area, was from Matune. But so was Hope Summers, who played Aunt Bee's friend Clara on The Andy Griffith Show, and was in the movie Rosemary's Baby, by the way. Matune is a flag station, and your City of New Orleans train might not stop. Same with the next station, Effingham. 16,000 people use the station in an average year, although its roots go back a long way. Effingham, too, was founded as a rail crossroads in 1851, and passenger service began in 1856. The community had been known as Broughton since 1812, but changed its name to Effingham in 1859. It's a city of crossroads, not only rail, but cars and highways and interstates. There's a car museum in the current train station, if you can make it here in the daytime. Outside, from the train window, you may be able to make out the cross at the crossroads, a 198-foot tall cross built in 2001 that was not built any higher because then the FAA would require blinking lights on it. Effingham became famous in 1949 due to a fire at St. Anthony Hospital, a tragedy which has changed hospital regulations around the United States to this day. One evening, a fire of unknown origin broke out and spread extremely quickly due to the fabrics and flammable tiles used in the buildings, which had no sprinklers. By the time emergency vehicle arrived, just a few minutes later, much of the building was on fire. 74 people died, mostly on top floors, including babies in the nursery and a nurse who stayed behind with them. The state of Illinois adopted new safety and construction codes quickly, and those became standard across the U.S. St. Anthony Hospital is still prominent in Effingham. On a lighter note, you wouldn't be the first to notice that the name Effingham sounds like someone who is censoring themselves from saying the true name. And even better, the communities surrounding Effingham all have interesting names themselves: Teutopolis, Shumway, Altamont, Funkhauser, Hartville, Moccasin. Going south through some of those, it will soon be midnight on the southbound City of New Orleans. The next station will arrive at about 12:30 a.m., or 4 a.m. for those going towards Chicago. Centralia is yet another flag stop for the City of New Orleans and a regular stop for the Illini and Saluki trains. Centralia was founded specifically by the Illinois Central Railroad, who named the town after the railroad in 1853. The current station, a brick building, was built only in 2003, replacing a little simple shelter in use until then. And so trains are, of course, very important to Centralia. The town's flag has a red stripe that represents the rail. A park near the station features displays of some rare antique train cars. Otherwise, Centralia is distinguished by other historical facts, both happy and sad. Early payday candy bars were made here. It was the Great Depression, and they were marketed as being a cheap and filling replacement for meals. A fire closed that factory in 1980. 1947 saw the Centralia mining disaster, in which accumulated coal dust suddenly blew out of the mine. 111 people died, and Woody Guthrie wrote the song The Dying Miner about it.
Goodbye, Centralia, goodbye.
Centralia was the birthplace of James Brady, Ronald Reagan's press secretary, who suffered the worst injuries during the 1981 assassination attempt. Brady's experience led to the Brady Bill, legislation intended to prevent gun violence. Incidentally, when Brady died in 2014, 33 years after the shooting, his death was technically ruled a homicide because it was related to the effects of the shooting. A few blocks walk away from Centralia Station is the annual Balloon Festival, and on the way there you can stop and check out the Centralia Carillon, a bell tower that is the 8th largest in the world. If unexpected exotic touches are your thing, look for the Sentinel building nearby. It's built in a style called Egypt Revival, and there are pharaoh figures on the outside. This is a reference to the nickname of southern Illinois, Little Egypt. The next stop is Carbondale, and this is where the City of New Orleans strikes out truly on its own, because this is the terminus of the Illini and the Saluki trains. Carbondale was established as a rail crossroads in 1853. It was named for local coal deposits, and it had its first little wooden depot built in 1854. A new station building, built in 1903, still stands and is on the National Register of Historic Places. Amtrak replaced it with a new station in 1981, but as of this video, a big new intermodal transport center is being planned. Carbondale, the city, is proud of its status as a crossroads, and it isn't just for trains and cars. In 2017, a solar eclipse moved across the United States, including Carbondale, and then 7 years later, another eclipse moving in a different line caught Carbondale again. This was so unusual that the town's official logo was changed to show it. Carbondale's Southern Illinois University, or as it used to be called, Southern Illinois Normal University, adopted the Saluki in 1951 as its mascot. A Saluki is an ancient Egyptian breed of hunting dog, and it ties into the Little Egypt theme of Southern Illinois, and gives that other Amtrak train its name. Students and others became notorious throughout the 1980s and 90s for their yearly Halloween celebrations that would get out of hand. In short, Carbondale's legacy is a unique one. And from here south, the City of New Orleans is the only Amtrak train you can ride. For leaving Illinois and roughly an hour south of Carbondale at around 2 a.m., you should be passing the other City of New Orleans train coming back north. The last thing the train does in Illinois is go through the struggling city of Cairo. When you pass over the Ohio River on a bridge built in 1952, you're actually using the support piers built for the original bridge in 1889. The bridges around Cairo were impressive, but took away the need for riverboats to stop in Cairo, leading to the town's notorious decline. Once with a population of 15,000, it's down to about 1,700 now. And the train is now pushing through western Kentucky. There's only one station stop in the Bluegrass State, and it's way down in Fulton on the border with Tennessee. And you might not even stop here, because Fulton is a flag stop for the city of New Orleans. But if you do, you'll find yet another small town, population 2,300, with a strong railroad heritage. There was a minor league baseball team here for the first half of the 20th century called the Fulton Railroaders. The town used to call itself the banana capital of the world, because Chiquita would ship their bananas from South America to New Orleans and then put them on trains north. The trains would always stop in Fulton to freshen up the bananas because Fulton had the only ice house on the way to Chicago. Fulton was originally a rail stop called Pontotoc, changing to Fulton in 1869. Apparently, Fulton was semi-officially known as the end of the line of the Paducah and Gulf Railroad, and if you addressed mail with that phrase on it, the post office would dutifully route it to Fulton. In Fulton today, you'll find the Jesse Weitzel House, built in the Italianate style in 1868. It's on the National Register, and actually the land is partially in Fulton's twin city of South Fulton, Tennessee. And that's the state that the train enters next, stopping at 2 stations in Tennessee. New Bern is a flag stop in the middle of the night. New Bern was named by an early settler from New Bern, North Carolina, and the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad was a presence here by the 1880s. The original station burned down in 1918, so a new one was built in 1920. But in 1965, the Illinois Central stopped passenger service to New Bern. Amtrak resumed it later, but actually went to nearby Dyersburg. And then in 1992, Amtrak abandoned the stop at Dyersburg and changed it back to New Bern again. The building is actually called the New Bern, Illinois Central Depot. 3,600 people a year use New Bern Station versus a population of only 3,300. A remarkable accident happened just outside the station in 2011 when a truck on the tracks was trapped as a train was bearing down on it. Both the driver of the train and of the truck escaped, and there were no fatalities or even injuries despite the fearsome wreckage. New Bern has a train-related Depot Days festival once a year, and is proud of the fact that a young Elvis Presley briefly lived in town in 1953 when he was part of a crew building Tennessee Highway 77. He even hung out at the City Cafe. The next stop is a big one, and has always been a big rail center. It's Memphis, Tennessee, which southbound passengers should be able to see in the first light of day. Trains came early to Memphis, and in 1914 Grand Central Station was built on the site of the older Calhoun Street Station. In the 1940s, the name was changed to Memphis Union, but then in 1968, that one closed, and now there was only the current Memphis Central Station. During the 1970s and afterwards, Memphis Station developed a terrible reputation, the worst station in the entire Amtrak system, some said. Eventually, it was restored and the area revitalized, and today there is a nice hotel, restaurants, a bar, and other facilities in the station. It's also used by various trolleys and buses to get around Memphis. But the only long-distance passenger train here is the City of New Orleans. Gone are the days when Memphis was served by such entities as the Chicago, Rock Island, and Pacific Railway, the Louisville and Nashville Railroad, the Southern Railway, the St. Louis-San Francisco Railroad, the Yazu and Mississippi Valley Railroad, and others. Named passenger services that reached Memphis included the Choctaw Rocket, the Memphian, the Delta Express, and a predecessor of today's Texas Eagle, also called Texas Eagle. The lyrics of the song City of New Orleans mention changing cars in Memphis, Tennessee. Trains do stop here for 15 or 20 minutes, but there's no changing of cars. The song then says, "We're now halfway home, we'll be there by morning, through the Mississippi darkness, rolling down to the sea." In fact, we're more than halfway home. It's about 7 hours to New Orleans. And with the current schedule, most of Mississippi will be in the daylight, southbound or northbound. In 1995, Amtrak adjusted the route between Memphis and Jackson, Mississippi. Before that, the City of New Orleans took a route further to the east, stopping at Batesville, Grenada, Winona, Durant, and Canton. In 1995, those stops were abandoned and the train now stopped at Greenwood and Yazu City. And in 2018, a new stop was added to that part of the route, and it's next. The first of 7 stations in Mississippi is called Marx, population 1,444, and it's the seat of Quitman County. Marx was named for a Leopold Marx, who bought land in the area, then known as Riverside, and encouraged train companies to come through the area, letting them use his land for free. Leopold was an interesting guy. He had arrived in New York from Germany in 1907 with only 18 cents to his name. He worked, bought some jewelry, and sold it for a profit as he financed his way across the country and ended up in Mississippi. The original 1904 train station building is now a restaurant, by the way. Marx has had an outsized influence on the United States. First of all, musicians such as Charlie Pride and John Lee Hooker came from Marx. In 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. visited Marx and was inspired by the poverty he saw here, so he began planning the Poor People's Campaign, a march to Washington, D.C. to draw attention to the issue. A week later, though, he was shot and killed in Memphis. Supporters went on the march to Washington anyway. The next stop is Greenwood, Mississippi. Rail came here in the 1880s, and the current station building dates from 1917. It's on the National Register and was restored in the 1990s when Amtrak resumed service here. Greenwood, the town, was originally called Dilliard's Landing and competed with a rival port up the river. That port was run by one Greenwood Lafleur, a half-Choctaw, half-French politician who oversaw deals between the towns and eventually had his name used for the former rival. Several notable people came from Greenwood. B.B. King grew up in nearby Itta and began performing on the radio in Greenwood in 1940. 2 years before that, in 1938, blues legend Robert Johnson died here after performing in Itta. Morgan Freeman lived in Greenwood as a child, and musical legends like Guitar Slim and Furry Lewis, who once lost a leg trying to hop a freight train and then recovered up in Carbondale, were both born here. Greenwood called itself the cotton capital of the world, and movies such as Nightmare in Bedham County and Ode to Billy Joe were shot here. Bobby Gentry, famous for the song Ode to Billy Joe, was born in Greenwood. Emmett Till, a black teenager, was killed at a small store 10 miles north of Greenwood, an event which is said to have kickstarted the modern civil rights movement. Next down the line, if the train stops at all at this flag stop, is Yazu City. It was called Hannon's Bluff at first, and then changed its name to Manchester, and then in 1841 to Yazu City, after the Yazoo River. It became a county seat in 1849. Yazu City was the site of the legendary Casey Jones train accident in 1900, a real event that led to a popular folk song recorded by many musicians, including Furry Lewis, whom we met at the last stop, Greenwood. Comedian Jerry Clower grew up in Yazu City and often referred to the place in his act. Blues musician Tommy McLennan was born in Durant, one of the places Amtrak stopped going to in 1995, but he grew up in Yazu City. Highway 51 runs through this area, and McLennan's song about that road was covered by Bob Dylan on his first album. Yazu City has had its share of tragedy. 3/4 of the town was destroyed by fire in 1904, and the Mississippi floods of 1927 greatly damaged it. After leaving Yazu City, the city of New Orleans rejoins its pre-1995 route at the next stop, Mississippi's capital city, Jackson. Jackson is by far the biggest city in Mississippi. Its 600,000 residents are 20% of the state's population, and it was founded as the capital in 1821. It was originally called LaFleur's Bluff, again after local hero Greenwood LaFleur, we talked about earlier, but was renamed in honor of Andrew Jackson, who at that point hadn't even become president yet. Trains came to Jackson early, in 1840. Later, a new station was built in 1927, and that was transformed into a big new transport hub in 2003. Today, Jackson Union Station is worth exploring if you get the chance. The city of Jackson seems in some ways haunted, though. Violent and other crime has been difficult to address, and the city has become notorious. Maybe it's the fact that Jackson is the only U.S. state capital built on top of an extinct volcano. One hopes that Jackson can right itself. But if you're interested, there are, of course, museums and performances and places to see and things to do here. From Jackson, the train heads towards another unstaffed flag stop in Hazelhurst. A mere 1,500 people a year use this station. Trains have been coming here since 1856, when it was a small settlement called Gallatin. An engineer with the Great Northern Railroad, George Hazelhurst, laid out a new town nearby and asked for it to be named after him. It was, the rail went there, and Little Gallatin declined. The Copiah County Courthouse was disassembled and rebuilt in Hazelhurst when it became the county seat in 1872. The impressive current courthouse dates from 1902. The train station, built in 1925, now also houses a railroad museum. Robert Johnson was born in Hazelhurst, although he grew up mostly in Memphis. Playwright Beth Henley was also born here, and her Pulitzer Prize-winning play, Crimes of the Heart, was set in Hazelhurst, as was the 1986 movie version, although unfortunately it wasn't shot in this town. Hazelhurst has also had its share of problems. It seems friendly enough in pictures, but then again, according to the official town website, there may be a distinct lack of things to do here these days. The next stop down the line is Brook Haven, county seat of Lincoln County. And the town may be called Brook Haven, which is fine, but its station has arguably the best name in the whole route, the Godbold Transportation Center. It was named after former Brook Haven Mayor Bill Godbold. Trains came to Brook Haven, which was named in 1818 after Brook Haven, New York, in 1858. A brand new Union Station building was added in 1907, which is now a military memorial museum. Most eye-catching is the 1890 power plant, whose gigantic smokestack can be seen from all around town, so you can always find your way back to the trains. 30% of Brook Haven's residents are under the poverty line, although the town appears nice and there are events happening. But the town has had a rough time over the years. Whites in Brook Haven refused to obey the 1954 Supreme Court ruling Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas, to integrate its schools. It held out all the way until 1970, when it finally gave in to integration, but immediately a private whites-only school was established. Given that, it may be surprising that the ultra-hip surrealist proto-beat writer Charles Henry Ford was born in Brook Haven. He traveled and lived around the world, hung out with people like Andy Warhol, and is buried in town. His sister Ruth Ford, a model and actress, was also born here. If you're wondering whether she was ever in a movie called Too Much Johnson, well, yes, she was, a 1938 Orson Welles project that was never shown publicly. She later lived in the Dakota Building in New York City, and she heard the gunshots the night John Lennon was murdered outside. Wikipedia says she was the first person to call 911, but this seems to be a misunderstanding of something film critic Rex Reed said. He also lived at the Dakota and claimed that within seconds of the shots, both Ruth and Leonard Bernstein called him to see what the noise was. Anyway, after leaving the mighty Godbold Transportation Center, we have one more stop in Mississippi to go. Do you think New Orleans is a degenerate place full of sin and debauchery? Well, if so, you're not alone. That view is shared by Henry Mcome, president of the Great Northern Railroad, who wanted to move rail facilities to somewhere quieter so his employees wouldn't be tempted by the nightlife. So he chose this section of Pike County, Mississippi, got 3 small communities to join into one, and he called it, modestly, Mcome. The current station was built in 1901 and restored in the 1990s and 2000s. It contains the Mcome Railroad Museum. Even more than many other rail towns, Mcome's history is notable in train history, because in 1911 workers on the Illinois Central decided to strike. The railroad hired strikebreakers, aka scabs. 3 days later, a train with these working scabs on it pulled into Mcome where striking workers met them. Violence broke out, leading to similar scenes across the country. The strike ultimately was destined to fail, but Mcome was remembered as being a flashpoint for it. The town saw violence again in the 1960s when the Ku Klux Klan clashed with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, and its first ever attempt at voter registration turned deadly. Mcome was also deadly for the rock band Lynyrd Skynyrd, whose plane crashed just outside of Mcome in 1977, killing several members. Mcome's history wasn't all doom and gloom, though. In the 1920s, it was known as having the world's largest ice factory. Also, the great Bo Diddley was born here, and he returned home in 2007 for the unveiling of a plaque in his honor just outside the station. And, arguably, Bo Diddley's polar opposite from the music world, Britney Spears, was herself born in Mcome in 1981. Like Bo and Britney, we're leaving the flag stop of Mcome and Mississippi altogether to enter the final state on the route. The first station in Louisiana, the final stop before New Orleans, is Hammond. Trains came to Hammond in 1854, and the current station was built in 1912. Hammond has 21,000 people and is known as the strawberry capital of the world due to its importance in the shipping of them. But Hammond is perhaps more well known for less cheerful reasons. Hammond has the lowest rate of high school graduation in all of Louisiana and the 24th lowest in the country. And it's the 5th most violent town in Louisiana, which is America's #1 most violent state, statistically. I must say that the official town website does have an inviting-looking downloadable map for doing your own walking tour of Hammond, though. So if you get a chance and want to check it out, hop off the train and see for yourself. If not, we'll continue down the line. Between Hammond and the end, the city of New Orleans goes between mighty Lake Pontchartrain and Lake Maurepas, often on the edge of the water. In either direction, you should get some nice daylight views here. And the southbound and northbound trains will usually pass each other again somewhere around here. But southbound passengers take a lot longer to get from Hammond to New Orleans than northbound passengers do in the other direction. Presumably this is due to freight schedules. But whatever the reason, if the train is on time, you should arrive in the Big Easy before 4 p.m. Northbound travelers will have just left at 1:45 p.m. I'm not going to cover New Orleans, one of the world's great cities itself, in this video. But it is worth noting that the Pontchartrain Railroad first built the line here in 1831, when the country was only 55 years old. It was the third ever railroad in the United States. New Orleans has had several train stations in its history, including New Orleans Union Station on the Illinois Central and the Southern Railway Terminal. Amtrak riders currently use the Union Passenger Terminal, built in 1954. From here, you can hop on to other Amtrak trains bound for Atlanta, Washington, D.C., and New York, Texas, and Los Angeles, and hopefully in the future, Florida, a section which was discontinued after Hurricane Katrina in 2005. Or you can stick around to see why that Killjoy Railroad president objected to the temptations of the Crescent City so much. Finally, of course, you could hop onto the next day's City of New Orleans and head back up to Chicago, or maybe even this time to some of the stops along the way to investigate them more in depth. There's a lot of history and life along the City of New Orleans, and the rhythm of the rails is all you'll feel. To see more about the areas around these stations, I recommend checking out the YouTube channel Primetime Travelers. Watch my exclusive travelogues, video diaries, and other stuff as a paid or free supporter at patreon.com/T1D Wanderer. Thanks to everyone helping me keep this channel alive. Special thanks this week, in random order, to David Richley, Matt Kane, Russell Davis, Will Phillips, Calvin Ferreira, Samantha, Lever Wong, Darcy Otranto, Ray Nichols, and Michael Fedor. Thanks for learning about the City of New Orleans train with me. Everywhere is worth exploring.